welcome to Beyond the Knife, a medical history podcast brought to you by Surgeons Hall, Museums, Library and Archives. We are part of the Royal College of Surgeons of Edinburgh. I am Chanté, Director of Heritage and Estates at the college. Each episode, I'm joined by a guest who shares a story from the history of medicine and surgery. This episode contains discussions on topics that some people may find distressing. Please take care while listening. On 10 June 1600, Robert Auchmutie was executed on the Royal Mile by the Maiden, Scotland's grim forerunner to the guillotine. Auchmutie was a surgeon and a member of what is today the Royal College of Surgeons of Edinburgh. His crime was the fatal outcome of a sword duel fought only weeks earlier. Auchmutie's downfall tells us much more than the story of a sword duel gone wrong, though. It came at a turning point where King James VI of Scotland, soon to be James I of England, was reshaping justice itself. Sometimes that meant ruthless witch trials. At other times, as in this case, it meant rejecting the old right of trial by combat in favour of a justice system defined by royal authority and politics. Today, I'm joined by Robin Fixter, Library and Archive Assistant here at the Royal College of Surgeons of Edinburgh, to share his research into this extraordinary case. Robin, welcome to the podcast.
Hello.
So we're going to start with the question we put to all of our guests, which is, if you could be present in any moment in the history of medicine, what would it be and why?
So there are a load of good options for this. I ended up coming down on, I'd like to be in Basel in 1527 for the first of Paracelsus's lectures when he becomes professor at the university there. He's a well-known guy and sort of history of being a very sort of practical anatomist and teacher, emphasizing that sort of empirical learning is much better to learning out of books. But it's not for that reason that I would want to be there. It's because at the first lecture and subsequent ones, he would really shock the audience by taking the works of Galen and Avicenna and burning them in front of them.
Wow.
And I'd like to see if it, for one thing, is true. But also just to sort of to be there in that sort of that early period of medical education where a lot of the older stuff is being challenged and eventually thrown out by people like Vesalius and Paracelsus. But yeah, and apparently he said to his students like he had more knowledge in his hat than any of these guys had. Apparently, when he had a lot of enemies, it wasn't a particularly well-liked guy. He ended up only lasting for a year in Basel. And that's the reason he published a lot of his later books, they think, under the name Paracelsus. His real name is Theophrastus von Hohenheim, but his name was Mud by the time he was finished in Switzerland. But yeah, apparently he said, you will all follow me, I am your king, I hold the scepter of physic. And I'd like to know if any of that is true, basically.
So Galen and Avicenna, they would have been manuscripts of theirs he was burning, or?
Early printed ones. I mean, this was early days of printing in Western Europe, but yeah, you would have had printed ones.
And he was saying, forget all of this. Mm-hmm. This is entirely rubbish. I know the way forward. I think my main takeaway from that is that it feels like there are centuries of a body of medical understanding that felt like the person making the discovery had to hold the truth. The idea of collaborative working seems very modern and actually working together to figure out ways forward.
Yeah.
But Robin, tell us why you're joining us today.
Yeah, so I was asked to come along because I recently did a couple of talks for the museum, some of the lunchtime talks and a few of the evening ones, on an incident which is not very well known in the college history. It's the only one of our fellows who was ever executed. In this case, it was in 1600. His name was Robert Auchmutie, and he was executed following the killing of a man in a duel here in Edinburgh in April of 1600. And it's a really interesting case, not only because it's an outlier in college history that not many people know about, and the fact that he was the only one, which surprised me because I know that so many of our fellows have had sort of Jacobite tendencies in modern history that's put them at odds with authority and with the government. And yet none of them was ever executed for treason or anything like that, even though they were quite close to Jacobite leadership. So it surprised me for that. But it was also just it's a really interesting one for just how many people get their spoon in the pot. I mean, everyone from Auchmutie and his lawyers and the defense and the justices, right the way up to King James VI, interceding directly in proceedings here. And it seems to have a little bit of everything, and yet no one really knows about it.
What a story.
It's a really interesting one.
So he's a fellow of the college,
Yes.
which means he's a surgeon.
Mm-hmm.
And tell us about the time he was living in.
So he joined the college in 1591. So he's a member for just under a decade before he's executed. September 29th. We're lucky that the archive maintains our historical records right the way back until 1581. So we have the decade preceding. So we were able to see him joining the college. And it's a very, very different organization at that time. It's very much a city-based organization. We're not in any way the international or even nationwide at that point. We are designed to operate within the city walls, to professionalize the craft of surgery, as it's called at that time. We are still on the city council at that point. We have a chair on the town council as one of the incorporations. We're the 10th incorporation to ever be founded in the city, after things like the hammermen, which is the metal workers, the guild, the goldsmiths, the cartwrights, the wig makers. There's loads of these sort of practical trades. And so that's how we're looked at. We're seen as being a trades guild and deeply integrated into the fabric and the working life of the city. We're not, as we are now, we're not so much an educational institution. We're very much a crafts guild. And the actual first entry in the minute book really goes a long way to showing how far we've come and how early in our history this is, because there's 4 sort of key elements to it which show it. And the first is that the meeting takes place in the deacon's house. He's examined in the deacon's own house, which is interesting. I mean, we're 97 years at this point away from getting our first permanent home. We have rooms on the Cowgate for about 10 to 15 years during the middle of the 17th century. But at this point in 1600, we're still meeting up in each other's houses and in the coffee house and other places that we can meet. So
and
we're
the
still...
deacon is what we would call today the president of the college. Okay.
Absolutely, yeah.
So the surgical lead of the college, really.
Yes, and it just shows how early on in our history this is. We don't have a permanent home, we're still nomadic. The second is that he's formally examined, which is a big deal because that's one of the things that's laid out in the Seal of Cause, which is the document that was given to us on our founding, which charged us to examine people for their skill in the craft. So the whole point, to professionalize the trade, was to weed out the quacks and the pretenders and people who just acted like surgeons, had no formal training, to distinguish us professionally. The third is that a charming bit of nepotism that he benefits from, which is that he's accorded what the minutes refer to as additional privilege, because his wife is the daughter of a current master of the incorporation. So he's the son-in-law of one of the high hegions of the organization, and it means that he's charged a reduced fee for entry.
Wow.
So it's not what you know, it's who you know, and that remains true to the present day. Finally, is that he mentions that he provided £20 for a no longer observed tradition, which is that the new members of the incorporation would provide a banquet. Banquet is the word that's used for the sitting members who have examined them, and it's listed as being £20. And I had to go back and do a little bit of maths to try and work out, well, how much would that be today? Basically, because this is in pound Scots, by the time you get to the Union of the Crowns 100 years later, they set a fixed exchange rate of 12 to 1 for English pounds to pound sterling to Scots pound sterling. And that plus factoring in 400 years worth of inflation comes out to about £430 today. So it's not a small amount. He is really throwing money at the organization, as well as paying his fees. So it's a real interesting, it's almost like he's joining a gentleman's club as much as he is joining a crafts guild. So it's a real sign of how far we've come, how early on we're talking about here. Added to the fact there's only about 30 guys in the incorporation at this point. It is a small organization. It's quite a select group. But yeah, he's mentioned another 8 times over the next 9 years, and he presides over the examinations of others. He's really engaged in the life of the organization. Twice he's given the key to the incorporation's kist, which is the chest in which the important documents and the important valuable things that the incorporation has are held. And that's really important when we haven't got a permanent home. It's literally being passed around. So they're trusting him with a good deal of responsibility. And he takes an apprentice as well, 4 years into his time with us in 1595, named John Hepburn, who becomes important later on in the story, but he takes him on a 5-year contract. And then he last appears on September the 18th, 1599, and after that there's no mention of him again, even in relation to his trial and execution. It's just not brought up.
Wow. So what does he do to be brought up for a murder charge?
Yeah, so while it's not recorded in our own institutional records, it does appear elsewhere, thankfully, so we do know the reasoning. And there's a very meticulous diarist who's living in Edinburgh at the same time, whose name is Robert Birrell. And Birrell, his diary survives to be published in 1798. And he records that on the 20th of April, or the full quote is, the 20th of April, being the Sabbath day, Robert Auchmutie, Barber, which is interesting, he labels him as Barber, because at that point, Barber Surgeon is the official title, and they're used rather interchangeably, slew James Washop at the combat in St. Leonard's Hill, and upon the 23rd, the said Robert was put in the ward in the Tolbooth of Edinburgh. So it's very succinct. I mean, it describes what happens. He kills him at the combat, which is in a duel. That's the language of the time. He names the time and the place, and that he's arrested, and he's put in jail 3 days later. But it's lacking in motive. We don't understand why this has happened. He says what's happened, but not why it's happened. But thankfully, the formal indictment that was read to him at his arraignment survived and is in the court record. And it was read to the assembled justices and to Auchmutie and his legal counsel when he was arraigned. And it's brilliantly melodramatic. And so the key part, I'll read a section from it. It's Robert Auchmutie, chirurgeon, so they label him as a surgeon using the antiquated term chirurgeon. Burgess of Edinburgh, ye are indicted and accused, having confessed a deadly hatred and malice against James Washop of Cleghorn, merchant Burgess of Edinburgh, lately, upon the 19th day of April, took on the singular combat with the said James, but without license of our sovereign lord, and provoked him thereto, that he, upon the morn thereafter, being the 20th of the said month, and the Sabbath day, should meet you, be furnished with sword and gauntlet upon St. Leonard's Crags, beside this borough of Edinburgh, near to our sovereign lord's palace of Holyrood House, where his majesty was in proper person for the time, and there to fight with you the singular combat for certain injurious words fallen between you and him. Having kept the said tryst at the said hour and place, ye and your aforesaid accomplices set upon the said James, and most shamefully, cruelly with swords, struck him in the face and upon the head, and gave him 4 bloody wounds thereon, and thereby most barbarously, cruelly, and tyrannously slew the said James Washop upon set purpose, provision, and forthright felony in high contemption. So they really throw the book at him, but while it's lengthy, it gives a lot of information. So the first is that Auchmutie didn't attempt to deny that he had killed this man. I mean, he confessed that he had done it. And the second is that the form of the killing was a singular combat, which is the name at the time for a duel. In this case, it would have been referred to in law as a duel by license, and they reference that as well, in that he has done it without license of our sovereign lord. So he's done it without the king's permission. So it's an illegal duel, and it names the time and the location. It confirms what Birrell said, that it's on St. Leonard's Crags, which is not far from here at all. It's just around the corner, just off the Pleasance now, what is now the Pleasance at the foot of Salisbury Crags. But it's outside the city walls. So it's definitely is not in the city. And it takes the trouble to mention twice that it's fought on the Sabbath on a Sunday. And that it had been fought mere sort of spitting distance away from Holyrood House, where the king was in proper presence at the time. So the king is at home. And
on the Sabbath, while the king is at home.
Really drumming home the fact that not only is he breaking the king's law, but he's committing sacrilege at the same time. And finally, that the reason for the duel is a result of injurious words between you and him. And yet, sadly, none of the sources record what these injurious words were. It's just that it seems to have been, he's taken offense, and very rapidly they've arranged, like, right, meet me tomorrow morning and we'll settle this. One of the other sources says that he presumed to take the revenge of a gentleman. And it's like, but again, it doesn't record for what. So it's a sad thing that we don't know. And finally, the last thing that it mentions is that Auchmutie wasn't alone during the confrontation. It's he lists others, his accomplices, in the way that it's said. And it sort of infers that they might have actually helped him with the killing. So it might not even have been an honorable duel. He might have ambushed this man and killed him. But yeah, so it's all very melodramatic, and they're really trying to hammer the guy.
So you have to tell us more about dueling.
Yes.
Dueling by license? Is dueling a thing that's happening in Scotland?
Very much so. Yeah, it's the duel by license is the latest evolution in a long-running chain of judicial and legal settlement in Scotland. There's a really great book for this, which was written by George Nielsen in 1890, called Trial by Combat, which basically breaks down the practice within the UK, but it mentions Scotland and England specifically and how they differ. And he asserted that you can see arranged combat as part of a substitute or even a really integrated part of the legal proceeding as far back as the 10th century. when the Scots are interacting with the Norse, but that it doesn't really catch on until the age of chivalry, sort of when that really kicks off during the 11th and the 12th centuries. And it's popularized then throughout Europe, and it reaches Scotland through England and through France and connections there. And it becomes codified into law under Robert the Bruce in his legal code, the Regium Majestatum, as a solution to multiple legal issues. So it can be used in disagreements over widows' dowries, oaths, financial debts, service between vassals and their lords. And basically it would be held that under this code, God would be on the side of the winner. So therefore it's a just solution to a problem, to a legal dispute, because God sides with the right. Therefore it's perfectly fine. It's not sinful. You're not committing sin by killing someone. It's only meant to be used as a tool for the nobles and the upper echelons of the feudal society, though. This is not for just anyone to use. And there's a wonderful quote from a later instance. This is during the reign of King James I of Scotland in the latter part of the 14th and early 15th century. During the reign of David I, when there's a quote saying, where a rustic, being a villain and unfree, meaning someone who's a peasant or a serf, accuses a burgess of any crime inferring trial by battle, the burgess was not bound to fight. So if a peasant comes to you and challenges you to trial by battle, you as a moneyed member of the upper aristocracy in the feudal system, you don't have to fight them. So it's very much for the nobles of Scotland to do and for no one else.
And do I have to get a license?
This is the thing, it's interesting to think of it in terms of like a driver's license,
Yeah,
but
do I
it's
have to
not.
apply? Do I have to show my sword and say, does this meet your MOT?
It's purely just you have to apply to the king for permission. If we think of license as synonymous with the word permission, so we can see it. So you literally, it's not even anything written down on paper. It'll be recorded in in royal records and things like that, but you don't get like a chit that is like good for one duel or something like that. No, it's literally just you have to tell the king has to give his consent.
And this is a case-by-case basis?
On a case-by-case basis.
And I'm guessing this is just men, right?
Yes. Yeah, I haven't come across any instances of women being allowed to duel. No, not at all. Later on, during the reign of King James I in the latter part of the 14th and early 15th century, it's further codified in a book that he oversees the publication of, called The Order for Combats for Life in Scotland. And this brings Scotland up to code, as it were, with the way things are being done in England, because James had grown up as a child hostage in England, so he'd seen their way of doing things and brought it back to Scotland, sort of up to the new standards of the chivalric tradition. And it includes having what they call a barras, it was essentially an enclosure to keep the fighters in so that no one can interfere and so that they can't be interfered with or interfere with anyone else or get help from the crowd or anything like that. They also have to be isolated prior to the start of the duel so that they can't run and so that they can't be put out of action by third parties prior to it happening. And the third is really interesting, is that the king needs to be present. Or if the king isn't present, he needs to have his marshal or his constable there. So there needs to be at least a representative from the king, because they are there to stop the duel if the king wishes it. Or the king can intercede and stop it at any point he wants. So it's very much happening at the king's permission, but also just at the king's whim. And there are cases in which the king intercedes when someone is very clearly about to lose the duel, and he intercedes and says, spare the life of this man. And you have to really agree, because it's only with the king's permission you're doing this in the first place. So yeah, it changes by the time you get to Robert Auchmutie's time, though. I mean, that's very much the chivalric tradition, and some of that does survive over the next couple of hundred years. But the main thing that survives is royal assent. And that's where you get by the time of the killing that we're referring to in 1600, it's the duel by license is the language that's used. And King James VI has a historical reputation of being very anti-violence. He's not a fan of just needless violence, and he particularly doesn't like dueling. He sees it as being a sinful way to settle a judicial dispute. It's also awkward for him because at this point he's next in line to the throne of England, and you've got the Union of the Crowns literally just down the road. And one of the main areas that this is happening is in the borders. So you've got English and Scots killing each other in judicial duels, and that is threatening to sort of upset the king's peace, but it's also threatening to make enemies, really, sort of in the borders. If he doesn't clamp down on the practice and it gets out of hand, and he's going to have problems like the bane of English kings is problems in the north. He doesn't want to have that when he accedes to the throne in a few years when Queen Elizabeth dies. So he issues an ordinance from the Privy Council in 1580, which explicitly outlaws duels over any matter besides settling treason against the crown. So if your neighbour has gone up in arms against the king, you can kill him, and you won't face any blowback from that. You didn't ask for the king's permission. Doesn't matter. The man's a traitor. And that is the only situation in which you're allowed to do it. There's no more dueling over oaths. There's no more dueling over financial disputes. It is purely in matters of treason.
So it's very clear.
Yeah. And he makes it as clear as you possibly can. People still need to apply to him directly, and this frees him of the obligation to have a proxy present. They still have to come to him directly. He gives his assent. It can then go ahead. I think the realization is that they can't be present at every single one of them. It's apparent that there is a demand for it, and that it's happening with such regularity that the king, or maybe one of his, the marshal or the constable, their later iterations in the early modern period, can't be present for every single one of them. So you just have to give your consent, and if it's done out of your sight, at least they asked your permission. So the ordinance is issued, and there are numerous examples over the next few years. Just prior to Robert Auchmutie, and I mean, in 1595, there's a duel that's fought between John Brown against George Hepburn with the king's license, and that's the one where the king intercedes, and Brown is forced to spare the life of Hepburn. In 1597, there's another one by the king's license at Barnbougle Castle, which is just up the Forth from Edinburgh, and it's fought between Adam Bruntfield and James Carmichael, and Bruntfield basically calls Carmichael out because his brother was the captain of Tantallon Castle, which is on the Forth as well, and it was suspected that Carmichael had murdered him, and there wasn't sufficient proof to take it to court. So Brunfield called him out, and he was quite a young man at the time. He was seen as being quite significant. He was only in like his early 20s, and he called him out and killed Carmichael, and with the king's permission. And according to Robert Birrell, who makes note of this incident as well, he said it was watched by as many as 5,000 people, which is, he's no stranger to hyperbole. A lot of his stuff is slightly overblown, but it is known that it's observed. And there are lots of people watching at the time. But
I think this is kind of wild. There's not enough evidence to take you to court for, you know, an accused crime, so you can be killed in a duel?
So you take it, you take the law literally into your own hands. Yeah. So ultimately, though, the king maintains authority, and that's the whole point of this particular part of the story, is that he's still exercising royal prerogative and royal control over the practice, even though he disapproves of it. But he's trying to phase it slowly out. So he's still got control, but he doesn't want to. He wants to get rid of the practice altogether.
It sounds quite theatrical as well, that moment of allowing two men to duel and then stopping it and saying spare his life. So performative in as much as that you want to maybe win the hearts and minds of a crowd to say the better thing is to not do this.
Mm-hmm. And though James he's a well-known author, I mean, the one that everyone remembers is Demonology, the book that he writes was later used to try witches. But he writes another one at around the same time called The True Law of Free Monarchies, which is published in 1595, and really lays out his own personal feelings on the matter. He scorns dueling as sinful. He says that it's really wrong to claim a divine mandate and just presume God's on your side because you've won and all that sort of stuff. And he resents clearly the fact that it's taken out of his hands as well. He is the arbiter of divine providence. He's God's chosen king. So it's an interesting debate which is happening at the same time as James really disapproving of violence in general and wanting to phase it out. So he starts to clamp down a lot on the practice to really kind of bring it back into his own hands so that he can phase it out, and he needs a good example to make. But what's apparent is that people haven't been obeying the statute in 1580 because it's reissued in 1600, in April of 1600, and the Privy Council specifically says when it's reissued that because people, to paraphrase it, because it's being ignored, it's inviting scorn upon the king's word, like, we hereby reissue it. Remember that this is the law. And that's April the 1st, 1600. And on April the 19th, April the 20th, Robert Auchmutie kills a man in a duel without the king's license and gives the king the perfect case by which to really throw the book at someone and make an example that will make an impression on the rest of the country and reassert his authority. So poor Robert Auchmutie, I mean, all he had to do was ask permission, but he's given the king exactly what he needed. And yeah, poor Washop as well. I mean, he of course comes off even worse out of this.
So Auchmutie ends up in court.
Yes.
What happens and what's his defense?
So he is brought before the justices and he's arraigned, and that brilliantly melodramatic arraignment is read to him. And it's apparent that as soon as they hear that, his lawyers, who are named as John Sharp and Alexander King, he has two legal representatives, They realize as soon as they hear that, they're going to need to keep this from getting to a jury. They need to prevent public feeling from interfering, because it's very apparent with the wording that they have put into that arraignment that they've made their decision. The king knows exactly what decision he wants made. Their task is going to be to keep it from getting before a jury. And they think they have a really good way of doing it. They have a twofold defense for Auchmutie, and it's a brilliant couple of legal loopholes that they try and exploit. The first is that by sheer happenstance, it turns out that Wauchope is an outlaw. He has been formally outlawed by the king, and it happens in 1595, 5 years earlier. One of his relatives, a fellow called Archibald Wauchope of Niddry, he's accused of treason. It's a very well-known case, which it seems incredible. He and conspirators tried to break into Holyrood Palace and kidnap King James. It's a harebrained scheme that doesn't work, and so all of the Wauchopes are questioned because one of their relatives has done this, and James refuses to go. So he refuses to take the stand and testify against a family member, and for this he is outlawed. And
Gosh, that's so interesting.
because he's an outlaw, Sharp and King argue that the duel is completely legal. He's not got any legal protection. He's an outlaw. He's beyond the king's law. And they say, well, this can be interpreted either as that or as a duel over a treason charge, because he has refused to help in a treason judgment against his relative. They also utilize a legal precedent which is listed in the titles by the Latin ob quietum publicum, which is the idea of it being in the interest of public peace. And that's something which pops up occasionally in the legal titles related to murder, which is that specifically when you're killing an outlaw, you are doing so in the interest of, it's a public service, you're doing so in the interest of the public peace.
Of the greater
king's
good.
peace, of the greater good. And there's an earlier case, only 3 months earlier in January of 1600, where someone used that defense. The legal case was called Guthrie v. Jordanna, and Guthrie uses this as his defense. And say, well, the man who I killed was an outlaw, therefore it was fine. And the justices agree. So Sharp and King feel pretty good about this. They've got a couple of recent legal precedents that they can rely upon. But what they don't count on is the fact that the Wauchope family have exactly the same idea. They've got 2 legal loopholes themselves that they want to use. And it's fantastic when you see that they arrive in court and they present their twofold rebuttal. And the first is that what's referred to as the letter of horning, which is the actual document by which someone is outlawed. You are listed in a letter of horning. It is issued, it is approved, it is stamped, and it's sealed. And then that's you. You're an outlaw. They produce this letter of horning at the trial and point out that this is invalid because it hasn't been stamped, it hasn't been sealed. It's a legal loophole, the bureaucratic loophole. And basically what was supposed to have happened is, by the Act of Parliament that makes a letter of horning the official document, the clerk or the bureaucrat who signs it basically has to seal it with a wax seal, and on that seal he needs to put his initials to show who it is who has put the seal on it. And both the seal and the initials aren't there on the official document. So well, this is invalid. It can't be used. And the justices agree. And so the first prong of their defense is blown completely out of the water. And then they go for the second one. They say, well, Guthrie v. Jordanna, that case is to do with someone who was a traitor for a capital offense. Like, he was under sentence of death. Our son wasn't. And they argue, that's apples to oranges. You can't use that defense. And the justices agree. So immediately, Auchmutie's defense has just completely evaporated, and they're left kind of scrambling as to sort of, how do we actually defend our guy against this charge? But luckily for them, there's no immediate agreement amongst the justices as to what is to be done. And they spend the next couple of weeks debating all of these Latin legal statutes and legal code, trying to make it fit the case. And it's apparent that both sides are getting a bit impatient about this. And on June the 10th, George Wauchope, James's father, who's leading the defense, shows up in court with 2 letters from the king and completely redirects the entire affair. The king is now interceding directly in the trial because George Wauchope has asked him to. And the letter he presents to the king, I'll read a passage from it briefly, is, Justice Clerk and your deputies, we greet ye well, forasmuch as Robert Auchmutie, chirurgeon, is presently in ward for the slaughter of James Wauchope, the parents of the said James have lamentably suited at our hands for justice, which we of our royal duty cannot refuse. It is our will, therefore, and we command ye, that with all convenient diligence after the sight hereof, ye proceed and minister justice against the said Robert. So the king has basically told them, stop mucking around, take it to jury, and get on with it. And he
This
gets
is
in
my
a,
example, guys. Come
yeah,
on.
and he gets a little shot in at Sharp King as well by pointing out what he refers to as frivolous subterfuges, which have delayed the trial thus far. So he really comes at them and is determined to have a trial over this. And Auchmutie is, I mean, what do you do? The king has said, you're going to trial. You're going to trial. And he is forced to agree.
That is a seriously impressive legal debate, though. The local people, were they aware of the case? Do you know if it was widely known?
Yeah, so the jury will be chosen from 12 local men, and their names are recorded in the court record. And they're the usual guys are sort of similar social standing to Auchmutie. They're merchants, they're burgesses, they're fairly sort of what we would think of as like the middle class of the early modern period. They're guys who have businesses and property. So it's well known in that situation, and in the local area it certainly would have been. It would have been very well known. I mean, Robert Birrell hears about it, writes it down. Several other people make note of it as well. So yeah, it attracts some attention, which is exactly what the king wants. Because if he'd chosen to do this in the borders instead and prosecute some local landowner who kills an Englishman on the other side for stealing his sheep or his livestock, it's not going to have the same effect as if you catch someone at it in Edinburgh, can popularize the case in Edinburgh and really make an example, and then everyone hears about it.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a part of the dance which is going on about this is to make this notorious.
So what happens at the trial? What's the result?
It's a very quick trial. Auchmutie has not denied that he's killed this man. It's been done without the king's license. He really doesn't have a defense. But to his credit, he uses his day in court to clear the names of the others who were referenced as his accomplices, is the way that the arraignment put it. And they're actually named in the court transcript. It's as James Chalmers and John Auchmutie, so presumably a close relative, maybe a brother. It's unclear. But he uses his day in court to take sole and full responsibility for the killing and really sort of gets them off the hook. It's unclear if they were even involved in the first place, but he uses his day to get them off the charge if there ever was going to be one. And he's found guilty and is put back into the toll booth. He's sentenced to death by beheading and for the confiscation of all of his movable goods. So basically it's all of his personal possessions will be confiscated by the crown. And he's put back into the toll booth, but he has no intention of staying there. And he tries to escape.
He tries to escape?
Yes.
Does it work?
Briefly. This is where the original institutional record of Auchmutie comes in handy again, because it names his apprentice, John Hepburn, and it's Hepburn who tries to save his life. Hepburn smuggles what is listed in Birrell's account as aqua fortis to Auchmutie, and aqua fortis is an archaic term for nitric acid. And you might think, well, what is he doing with that? But it comes into another part of the story is that when he's put back into prison and he's back in his cell, Auchmutie says that he's sick, and he hangs two curtains, basically, one on the inside of his window and one on the outside of his window. And Birrell says that he says he was sick and might not see the light. So he's darkened his cell and said that he's ill. And once he's got these coverings up, he uses the nitric acid to dissolve the bars on his windows.
Amazing.
And he then sends a message to Hepburn and gets him to stand outside sort of at dawn when the guard is going to be changed on the toll booth, and he instructs him to wave a handkerchief so that he can see from the window when the guards are leaving, so that in the brief time in the changing of the guard, he can sneak out the window and make a run for it. And Hepburn does this, and he waves his hanky, and unfortunately it's seen by the guards. So as Auchmutie is climbing out the window, he sees the signal, he starts to escape. The guards round him up very quickly. And
But it was such an impressive plan.
It was quite good. Apparently the toll booth was kind of infamous for being escaped from. And you had cases of other people. There's a famous case of a woman who's held there who's pregnant. And so she has a regular visit from a wise woman, a sort of what we would think of now as sort of a midwife. And this woman visits regularly. And on one occasion, she just changes clothes with the woman and leaves.
Brilliant.
And unfortunately leaves this midwife in the cell. But so there have been some intelligent ways out of the toll booth if you're willing to risk it. But no, Auchmutie is caught.
So did they have access to nitric acid because they were medical professionals, or?
Unclear, to be honest.
Okay.
I
Is
do
that
not
just
know.
on the street?
Is that just something you have around if you're a surgeon? No idea, I'm afraid. But it does seem very sort of Wile E. Coyote is like the kind of,
Yeah.
yeah, just happened to have that kicking around. Yeah.
Well, I mean, from a duel to dissolving your cage bars. So what happened?
So yeah, he's put back in prison, and on June the 20th, he's taken a very short distance to the Toll Cross, which is on the Royal Mile. And there he meets his end at the hands of the Maiden, which is of early design of guillotine, which had replaced the city's last beheading sword in 1565. Essentially, the town council wanted a more cost-effective way to execute its criminals, because you have to sharpen the sword every single time, and eventually it wears it down, and the executioner needs to be paid, and all the rest of it. And the Maiden is essentially a flat-pack guillotine. It's packed up and it's taken around what we would now think of as the central belt. So it's an effective means of execution, and he is the 26th person to be executed with it. It goes on to execute 150 people before it's eventually retired in 1710. So it goes on for another century, just over 110 years after executing Auchmutie. It's now preserved in the National Museum of Scotland. You can go and see it today. It's a macabre looking thing. It really
So
is.
macabre, right? I find it fascinating that it's called the Maiden as well.
Yeah, I wanted to find out why that was, and opinions vary. The Society of Antiquaries for Scotland were the ones who wanted it to be preserved, and in their papers about the Maiden, they insinuate that it might have been some sort of sick joke, because in the first like decade or so of it being in existence, it's not really used.
Oh, I
And they're
see.
making sort of a crude joke at the
Of it
it's the
being
Maiden,
a
yeah,
virgin
it's a
or
virgin, it's not being
gosh.
used. So that was one of the theories, but there are others.
And then it was used for almost 200 years.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a effective, if very macabre machine.
Well, I guess if you don't have enough time to seal your letters, you've got to streamline those bureaucratic processes across the board, right?
Just save time where you can, yeah.
So what is the legacy of Auchmutie? Was there a legal legacy that was left?
Absolutely was, yeah. So the king wanted this to be a good example. He wanted to really throw the book at someone and really reassert royal authority. And just 5 months later, in November of 1600, the sentence is codified into law. There's an Act of Parliament from the Scots Parliament, which, again, I'll just read quickly, is considering the great liberty that sundry persons take in provoking others to singular combat upon sudden and frivolous quarrels, which engender great inconveniences within this realm. Therefore statutes and ordains that no person in time coming without his highness's license fight any singular combat under pain of death, and his movables confiscated to his highness's youths, and the provoker to be punished with a more ignominious death, nor the defender at the pleasure of his majesty. So basically he's codified the exact sentence Auchmutie has been given into law, and he's added the little sweetener, which is, if you are the person who challenges for the duel, you kill your opponent and survive, you're still going to be put to death. So really kind of rubber stamping what has now happened and saying, that's it. Without my license, you do not get to duel.
And does it work?
To a degree, yes. The private duel does continue, but of course they're all illegal. But there is a very well-known case only 3 years later in which an Italian fencing master, a fella called Daniel Arcadechila, informs Lord Cecil, at this point James is King of England, and Lord Cecil is informed by this Italian swordmaster that Francis Mowbray, who's the Lord of Barnbougle, has confided in him that he intends to murder the king. And Mowbray protests his innocence and demands trial by battle against the Italian. And they're both held in Edinburgh Castle. Prior to this duel, they're isolated as per the old chivalric tradition, and the barrass is erected as per chivalric tradition. And they erect it nowhere else than in the great close at Holyrood Palace. So it's literally going to be done in front of the king. And it's apparently like the king is well and truly at the end of his tether at this point. And he's like, right, you're going to be held in Edinburgh Castle, and then you're going to do it in front of me in the old style, and we'll settle this once and for all. But the sad thing is that Mowbray attempts to escape the castle prior to the duel, and he falls from the castle esplanade and is killed. He dies. But because he's being held under a treason charge, his body is hung, drawn, and quartered. So even if he was innocent, doesn't matter. The king wants to really reinforce the lesson again, because you weren't listening the last 3 times.
So he fell while he was trying to escape.
Trying to escape from the castle, yeah. So it's not quite, Auchmutie's case is not quite the final line under it that I think he would have hoped for. It doesn't stop the practice altogether. Yeah. So he remains the only member of the college ever to be executed as a result. Yeah. But the legal legacy, it goes on beyond that. Not only is it used in the statute in 1600, when they're rewriting the statutes in 1678, he's named in the statute under dueling by name. Robert Auchmutie, this case, he killed a man in a duel. So even decades after the fact, that is being still used as the case to show you don't kill a man in an unlicensed duel. You will be executed for it. You're confiscated. All your valuables will be confiscated. And it's not until an Act of Parliament under William III in 1819 that trial by combat disappears from the record altogether. It's completely removed. It's not an option anymore. So yeah, I mean it's a long legacy, but he leaves his mark on it.
What a series of incredible stories, and we still don't know what started it all. We don't know what Wauchope said to Auchmutie to set all this off.
No, injurious words is literally all that's said in any of the sources. And that he presumed to take the revenge of a gentleman. And that is it. You can fill in the blanks yourself with anything, I suppose.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Robin.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Thank you for listening to Beyond the Knife, a medical history podcast brought to you by Surgeons Hall Museums, Library and Archives. To find out more about us, you can visit www.museum.rcsed.ac.uk. You can also follow us on our social media channels. Join us wherever you get your podcasts.